Take it easy, Miss Karen.
See? What I tell you? Listen. Next time, listen. Faith is all that matters. We had faith, and we made it. We are gonna make it.
Okay, Pearson?
We have a plan. My friends. My loved ones. A plan. It is a real plan. We are gonna leave this place, and we are gonna find our own paradise. Our own heaven. Tahiti!
I'm your little pop-in host today, Rutzgar. Today I'm here to share my obsession. Just like almost every other player, I have been obsessed with Red Dead Redemption 2, trying to uncover and reach that glorious 100%, maybe even platinum. Anyway, to feed this obsession, I've decided on creating a nice little gallery breakdown for you. The victims and survivors of the Dutch Van der Linde reign. However, I have just a few rules and guidelines I use to help for the organization. There will be spoilers regarding each character's outcomes or demise. You have been warned. These characters are not in order of importance, as well as when they died. Character status is based on when the character was last seen or spoken about. This list includes both the events of Red Dead Redemption and Red Dead Redemption 2. Alright, let's start off with an easy one. Jenny Kirk. Jenny does not really play a major role, or even a minor one at that, in the story at all, but she was the first member to die in Red Dead Redemption 2's prologue. A budding thief, Jenny joined the Dutch Van der Linde gang prior to 1899 and was proving to be somewhat of an asset. However, after the botched ferry heist in Blackwater, Jenny is injured during the gang's escape. She dies shortly after arriving at their first safe house in the mountains. Her grave can be visited by John Marston in the epilogue and is one of 9 graves for the Paying Respects trophy. Now I know I am cheating a bit here, but they are both such minor characters that I didn't see the point in breaking them into 2 separate entries. Anyway, the Calendar brothers, Mac and Davy, joined the Dutch Van der Linde gang at some point prior to the Blackwater ferry heist. There isn't much information regarding the two before the events of Blackwater, just multiple gang members remarking about how vicious outlaws the pair were. After the heist turned sour, both Mac and Davy are injured in the escape. However, Davy is rescued, only to shortly die just a few days into the gang's escape, but Mac has to fend for himself. Mac is mentioned later by the Pinkerton detectives who confront Arthur Morgan and Jack Marston while fishing, stating that they found Mac and killed him.
Mr. Morgan, I took your advice, sir.
Orville Swanson. Oh, Swanson, how well you have fared from gang discord. Orville Swanson is the perfect example of how I would perceive a gang would corrupt a man of faith. Joining the Dutch Van der Linde gang after saving Dutch's life, no deal was given. Swanson strayed away from the path of the enlightened and fell into the welcoming arms of loose women and bottomless bottles. A relative constant thorn in the side of Arthur Morgan and other members of the gang. Throughout most of the game, Swanson can be found wandering drunk around camp. As seeds of discord begin to reach their limits, however, Swanson becomes sober and tries to regrow his flame of faith that had dimmed long ago. Swanson's parting words are one of hope and redemption as he sees Arthur for the last time. Now that he has left the Dutch Van der Linde gang, Swanson is revealed in the epilogue that he has gone back to start a new following of fellow worshippers in New York. Preacher of the First Congregational Church. Quite the upgrade, Swanson.
What the hell you think you're doing?
You don't mess with Miss Tilly Jackson. You don't mess with Miss Tilly Jackson. Tilly's one of the Dutch Van der Linde gang's charming thieves, able to work almost any mark for plenty of their cash. Tilly has been sporting the outlaw life since the mere age of 12, running with the abusive Foreman Brothers gang prior to joining up with Doug. Tilly ran after she murdered the cousin of gang leader Anthony Foreman, lauded as a traitor despite not having a completely valid reason to do so. Once the Pinkertons finally catch up to our beloved outlaws, Tilly runs to safety and hides John Marston's son Jack. Tilly later leaves with Sadie, Jack, and Abigail to start their new lives.
Thank you,
While
both
not
of
a
you.
major moment in the epilogue,
It was
you can
Anthony
find Tilly
Foreman.
waiting
He
for
thinks he
the
owns
train
me.
in
I
Saint
remember.
Denis.
Where is
Tilly is
he?
delighted
Went
to
out
see
hunting or
John,
something.
as she has
They were
since left
following
the
him, I
outlaw
think.
life and married a
Well,
lawyer, about to give
Killed
birth to her
those
first
fellas
child.
there.
While Tilly
There
runs
they
off in
are.
a hurry, she
Tilly,
does
grab
later
that
write
gun.
and gives her
Anyone
best wishes.
approaches, shoot him. Oh, don't worry, I'll be just fine. Now catch that bastard.
Mary Beth Gaskill. Mary Beth, the manipulative vixen of the Dutch Van der Linde gang. Mary Beth joined Dutch on his journey for riches some time before 1899 and quickly made her name known as a heartbreaker. Throughout the course of the game, Mary Beth is often reunited. Throughout the course of the game, Mary Beth is often recruited whenever distractions need to be made, but is often underestimated in other outlaw skill sets. Mary Beth can be spoken to by Arthur once his illness has been discovered, and she will offer her condolences as well as give uplifting remarks to make his last moments the best they can be. Along with two other members, Mary Beth leaves the gang once Dart starts to embrace the madness. Mary Beth can be found by John at the Valentine. Mary Beth can be found by John at the Valentine train station during the epilogue of Red Dead Redemption 2. She has become a successful romance author and gives John one of her books as she says her goodbyes, departing forever. Number 20. Abigail Marston. Abigail, you may nag John to death, but you were definitely the moral compass of your family. Wife of Red Dead Redemption protagonist John Marston, Abigail was once a prostitute who was introduced to the original Dutch Van der Linde gang by Uncle, of all people. Due to her profession, Abigail had relations with almost all of the men in the gang, and eventually fall in love with that dolt John Marston. After giving birth to their son Jack and their unnamed daughter, who would later die of illness, Abigail became the motherly guardian of the Dutch Van der Linde gang and the Marston clan. Throughout the events of Red Dead Redemption 2, the player is able to learn more about Abigail and her motherly instincts to keep the Marstons safe. Abigail grows rather close to the Abigail grows rather close to protagonist Arthur Morgan, who eventually believes that they are among the few who are able to make it out of the gang alive. With Morgan and Sadie Adler's help, the Marstons are able to go into hiding. In Red Dead Redemption 2 epilogue, John and his family settled on a plot of land they purchased legitimately out at Beecher's Hope outside of Blackwater. She finally marries John and turns Beecher's Hope into a home.
Had it for a long time. Take it.
Serious?
However, once we reach the events of the first game,
We've lived a lot of lives.
However, once we reach the events of Red Dead Redemption, life isn't looking so pretty. Abigail and Jack are kidnapped by representatives of the Pinkerton Detective Agency in order to force John to hunt down his surviving gang members. Once this has been completed and the family is reunited, the reunion is short-lived as Beecher's Hope is raided. In Red Dead Redemption's epilogue, it is revealed that Abigail passed away at the age of 37 due to unknown causes. Number 19. Karen Jones. Now that we have finally reached Karen Jones, we can finally round out the trifecta of the female thieves of the Dutch Van der Linde gang. Karen joined the gang before 1899, gaining notoriety as an established scam artist and a notable alcoholic. Karen begins to have a lustful and hateful relationship with fellow gang member Sean McGuire, which quickly spirals out of control. Despite Karen's alcoholism worsening as she moves from camp to camp, Karen actually contributes to the gang early on. Once safely away from Horse Shore Overlook, Karen rounds up the posse to rob the bank in Valentine. This gives the player the first major score. Karen's whereabouts are unknown once we reach the epilogue, but Tilly Jackson assumes she is dead in a ditch with a bottle in her hand. Number 18, Lenny Summers. Lenny! Why did you have to leave us so soon? A rather young outlaw from an educated slave family, Lenny joins up with Dutch and company sometime before the botched ferry robbery in Blackwater. Lenny found himself on the run at the tender age of 15 after murdering drunk men in a fit of revenge against the murder of his father. We first met Lenny in grief after the death of his lover, Jenny Kirk, but he works through it and gives us some of the best missions in the game. One of these missions is to blow off some steam before saving Mike Cabell, where Arthur and Lenny have an odd experience drinking way too much at the Valentine Tavern. Arthur and Lenny's relationship feels one of the most comedically genuine relations in Red Dead Redemption 2, so his exit leaves quite the impact. Always a loyal soldier to Arthur, Hosea, Dutch, and the cause, Lenny helps out with a majority of important missions throughout the game. However, Lenny finally meets his end as he is shot to death while escaping Saint Denis on a rather messy heist. What makes matters worse? Lenny's body is left behind by the core group as they run to escape the country. Tahiti, Dutch once told us, is where we'll find paradise. Number 17. Kieran Duffy. Kieran, you may have been running with them O'Driscoll boys, but you definitely earned your keep. Originally kidnapped by Arthur Morgan and interrogated about the whereabouts of rival gang leader Colm O'Driscoll, Kieran was eventually accepted as a member of the Dutch Van der Linde gang after he kills an O'Driscoll attempting to end Arthur's life. It only took a castration threat from Bill Williamson to convince Kieran to jump the O'Driscoll ship. After his antics at Horseshoe Overlook, Kieran actually doesn't participate much in the overall main story. Don't fret, you can take a nice camping side mission with him where you go fishing. In my personal opinion, Kieran has the most visually gruesome death of all of the gang members. Once the gang transfers their camp over to Shady Belle in Chapter 3, Kieran is re-kidnapped by his former compadres. Kieran is then made an example of as a traitor by the O'Driscolls, as he is last seen riding in his horse into Shady Belle, holding his own head cupped in his hands. Number 16. Uncle. Uncle, I don't care if you have lumbago, you need to get off your ass and do some work around here. I tell you to edit this video, but I believe it's a bit out of your league. One of the oldest members of the Dutch Van der Linde gang, Uncle is the prime example of a thief who barely commits petty crimes and just drowns himself in between the legs of the nearest lady of the Uncle, besides being the lovable drunken oaf that everyone tolerates, does little to contribute to the overall vision of the gang. He does discover intel about a Leviticus Cornwall train that is traveling outside of Rhodes, which fails in a bright blaze of glory just like the other major gang robberies. After Uncle leaves the gang as Dutch loses his sanity, we hope to lose him forever. Then here comes the epilogue. In the Red Dead Redemption 2 epilogue, Uncle runs into John in Blackwater and decides to redeem himself. Between Uncle, Charles, and John, they are able to build the Beecher's Hope home that Abigail would absolutely love, without Uncle sticking around. Even though he has no blood ties with the Marstons, he does become the de facto uncle to Jack. Uncle sticks around all the way to the Red Dead Redemption final act, where he sacrifices himself to fight off U.S. Army soldiers as they raid the Marstons' slice of paradise in order to save Jack and Abigail. Number 15. Charles Smith. Charles Smith is one of the few Native Americans in Red Dead Redemption 2 that doesn't actually hate the Dutch Van der Linde gang. Charles joined the gang relatively recently, as he had only been running with them for about half a year before the events of the game. Charles honestly does not receive the attention he deserves, as many questions throughout the game. Arthur is paired up with Charles to get the job done or make the problems go away. Yet another positive, Charles' AI is actually pretty damn good, and he can easily hold his own on the battlefield. Charles is one of the few surviving members of the Saint Denis bank heist, besides being presumed dead after distracting guards to the core group can make their escape. Charles, along with Uncle, play major parts in the game's epilogue. John and Uncle find him alive after many years street fighting in Saint Denis of all places. Charles joins John and Uncle in building out Beecher's Hope, creating the new life the Marstons well deserve. Charles stays until Abigail and John marry, then leaves to Canada with hopes of finding a family of his own. Number 14. Simon Pearson. While he doesn't fight, Pearson has to be one of the most useful characters in the entire Dutch Van der Linde gang. Originally serving in the United States Navy, after a series of ordeals, he became the cook and honorary butcher of the Dutch Van der Linde gang. While serving as a side quest giver early on in the game, Pearson's main purpose is to set up each camp when moving locations, as well as serving as a small trader and crafting vendor. While Pearson normally will talk a big game and occasionally bust your balls like any other degenerate, Pearson always wanted what is best for the family. When given the option due to Dutch's insanity, Pearson leaves the gang in shambles. In the Red Dead Redemption 2 epilogue, Pearson is one of the only survivors who actually isn't given a small cutscene upon discovery. Pearson has now married into a happy life and has taken over the general store in Rhodes. Each time John visits the store, Pearson greets him and asks about his family. Number 13. Javier Escuela. Javier is a prime example of what being loyal to a revolutionary truly means. Growing up in Mexico, Javier witnessed the tragic castration of his father and his cohorts for just trying to make life easier for the common folk. This stroked the gentle flame of revolution inside Javier, who garnered a reputation as the revolutionary of the people. After murdering an esteemed member of the military, Javier fled to America and ran into Dutch stealing chickens of all things. Javier quickly becomes a loyal gun for the Dutch Van Doelen gang, participating in most missions that needed a few extra hands. Despite his belief in Arthur, Javier sides with Micah and Dutch in the game's final standoff, fleeing the incoming Pinkertons.
Okay, then.
Since Javier's story doesn't end in Red Dead Redemption 2, Javier becomes the central antagonist for the Mexico arc of Red Dead Redemption. Hiding out from John under the protection of the Mexican government, Javier's fate is entirely up to the player. You can either stain your hands with Javier's blood, or capture him and let the government hang his lifeless body for the masses. Number 12, Susan Grimshaw. I know I've said this about most of the women on this list, but Mrs. Grimshaw is a force to be reckoned with. Grimshaw was one of the original members and the first woman of the Dutch Van Doelen gang, back when it was only Dutch, Hosea Matthews, and Arthur Morgan. Grimshaw was originally involved with Dutch on an intimate level, but it was later broken off as Dutch moved on to his wife Annabelle. Despite this, Dutch acknowledges the usefulness of Grimshaw and respects her deeply. Once we reach the events of Red Dead Redemption 2, Grimshaw has become essentially the office manager of the gang. Along with Pearson, Grimshaw is tasked with the general operation of the camp, including moving it from place to place. The only major event that Grimshaw impacts is in late Chapter 6, when fellow gang member Molly O'Shea stumbles into the camp drunk. This isn't normally a surprise, but she is raving on how she ratted the gang out to the Pinkertons. In response, Grimshaw shoots her dead. In a rather similar scene even later on, Grimshaw meets her end while facing down Micah after Arthur discovers he's the rat. The snake in the grass is too fast for you, Grimshaw. Number 11, Josiah Trelawney.
Ah, there you are, dear boy.
Josiah, at least we are only writing about you and not having to break you out of anywhere. A con man immigrant from England, Josiah Trelawney is a smooth-talking and conniving trickster that can convince many of the best of men. I refer to Trelawney as an occasional friend of the Dutch Van Doelen gang, as he has the tendency to disappear for weeks to months on end. For example, we don't even encounter Trelawney until we reach Rhodes, and it seems like he is just out for his own interests. Here's the catch. Despite his fickleness, Trelawney actually shows results. Not only is Trelawney responsible for the initial rescue of our next entry, he also organizes a large ferry score in St. Denis that actually goes well. Once the gang has finally reached their final camp at Beaver Hollow, tensions immediately increase. Due to having a family and not wanting to be involved, Trelawney is one of the first members to leave. Arthur gives him his best wishes to escape the outlaw life for good. Now buckle in, fellas. This is going to be the last survivor for a while. Number 10, Sean McGuire. Now I am putting my foot down. You can't be a legitimate gang without having a wisecracking and vulgar Irishman. Coming from a long line of rebels back in his homeland, Sean McGuire immigrated to the United States and somehow joined up with the Dutch Van Doelen gang at some point before the main story of Red Dead Redemption 2. After the botched Blackwater ferry heist, Sean has to escape on his own, but was later captured by bounty hunters. In swings Trelawney to the rescue, as Arthur and company recover him and boost morale for the entire camp. Sean plays a large role in the events surrounding the dueling Braithwaite and Gray families. Often paired up with Arthur to cause plenty of mayhem, the player is able to develop a connection with Sean pretty quickly. While there was still plenty of Sean's story to be told, it is tragically cut short on a surprise ambush by the Gray family. While walking through Rhodes for a security job, Sean is shot directly through the skull by Gray's men. Number 9, Molly O'Shea. Miss Molly O'Shea is nothing but high society now. Coming from a wealthy family in Ireland, Molly joins the Dutch Van Doelen gang after catching the eye of the head honcho himself. While early on it is clear that Dutch and Molly had a romantic relationship, Molly was often pushed aside for bigger and more important plans. Molly and Miss Grimshaw joined the gang in similar ways, yet ended up with drastically different outcomes. On one hand, Grimshaw was able to grow through the heartbreak and still become an asset to the gang. On the other hand, Molly found her solace down at the bottom of the bottle. I guess there were no other addictions Rockstar could give these people. Molly's only contribution to the story is that she drunkenly announces that she's a possible leak of information to the Pinkerton Detective Agency. This results in Molly being shot dead by Grimshaw as she knew the rules. Molly's death would have come sooner or later, but she actually wasn't the poison flower, but 'twas Micah. Number 8, Leopold Strauss. While I dislike Micah and can't trust him as far as I can throw him, I hate Leopold Strauss. Arriving in New York during the New York City draft riots, Herr Strauss was left alone due to the recent passing of his uncle due to a fatal heart attack. Strauss didn't have to wallow for long, as shortly thereafter he met Dutch and was quickly drafted into the Dutch Van Doelen gang as their accountant. Completely unemotional and with a lack of moral, Strauss easily becomes the perfect puzzle piece Dutch was missing for his loan shark in operations. Strauss primarily acts as a quest giver, drafting Arthur into chasing down citizens who are trying to skip out on their bill. His mission, moneylending and other sins, features the fatal encounter with Thomas Downs. It was in that moment where Arthur knew he had tuberculosis. Once Arthur receives his diagnosis, he begins to directly oppose Strauss's methods. Once the gang finally settles into Beaver's Hollow, Arthur has had enough and throws Strauss out of the camp. Once the player finds Charles in St. Denis during the epilogue, Charles reveals that Strauss was eventually rounded up by the Pinkertons and dies in custody without saying a word. Number 7. Bill Williamson. Now Bill is one of the more interesting characters on this list. Coming from a hardcore, alcoholic, broken home, Marion Bill Williamson joined the U.S. Army and committed relatively unknown atrocities, or at least attempted murder. This led to Bill's dishonorable discharge, which threw him into a dark pit of depression fueled by the wicker baskets filled with moonshine gently lowered in. Bill encountered Dutch Van der Linde after trying to rob him, where Dutch simply responded with laughter. Since that moment and during the events of Red Dead Redemption 2, Bill Williamson becomes the loyal gun that will not hesitate to fulfill Dutch's dream. In the final standoff, Bill joins Micah and Dutch in an effort to save what is left. However, this is not where Bill's story ends. Reluctant to join Micah's new gang with some of his old pals, Bill forms his own gang and takes over Fort Mercer. Once John Marston has recruited his own group of naive good-doers to raid the fort, it is revealed that Williamson retreated to Mexico for protection. Bill finally meets his end after Mexican Colonel Allende tries to trade Bill's life instead of his own, where he quickly meets his demise by either John's or rebel leader Reyes' hand. Number 6. Hosea Matthews. Alright everyone, we need to take a step back all the way to the 1870s for this one. While we don't know much about Hosea's past, we know that he grew up as a decent robber and met Dutch Van der Linde many years prior to the events of Red Dead Redemption 2. How did they meet, you ask? Well, in typical deviant fashion, these two decided to rob each other and became best friends in the process. Once the Dutch Van der Linde gang was founded, Hosea immediately stepped in as Dutch's advisor and second in command. Hosea is a key player in the dynamic of the gang, and his relationship between Dutch and Arthur is core to the main story. Since Arthur was the first recruit into the gang at a young age, both Hosea and Dutch began to step in and be surrogate fathers to the young Morgan. Hosea's death was a complete shock to many other members of the gang, as Hosea is the other poor soul to lose their life during the botched bank robbery in Saint Denis. While Lenny dies during the gang's escape, Hosea is publicly executed by Pinkerton agents after Dutch fails to surrender. As Hosea continued to push back against Dutch's more radical ideals all the way until the end, we weren't surprised Hosea was taken out. Number 5. John Marston. John Marston, the only character that we know better than Arthur Morgan in the Red Dead Redemption franchise. Having committed his first murder at the meager age of 11, John would be considered as a bad seed by many people in modern society. Just a mere 1 year later, John was caught robbing an innocent couple's home where Dutch Van der Linde stepped in to save him from the noose. John serves as the original Red Dead Redemption protagonist, as well as becoming the new protagonist after Arthur's death. The journey of John and his family are a core concept of the Red Dead Redemption franchise. While John is initially a major pain in the ass in Red Dead Redemption 2, consistently getting himself in trouble, John's growth as a character throughout both core games is one of the best rock stars ever written, except for Arthur Morgan, of course. John Marston finally meets his maker at the end of Red Dead Redemption when the Pinkertons and the U.S. Army completely betray the Marstons, raiding their ranch. John is able to take out many of the incoming enemies before he is filled with lead. Number 4, Sadie Adler. Now, if you had been following this little mini-series I've been crafting, you would probably argue that there is enough evidence that Arthur is my favorite character in the franchise. This isn't true, as Miss Sadie Adler takes the crown. One of the last members to join the Dutch Van der Linde gang, Sadie Adler was recruited by Dutch and Arthur after the O'Driscolls murdered her husband and set her home on fire while the gang was on the run. Originally suffering from guilt due to her life being completely turned upside down, Sadie quickly transforms into a vengeful and driven one. Once her 180-degree arc is complete, Sadie becomes a major gun and huge asset to the gang.
Finish off them O'Driscolls. I hear the last of them is holed up at Hanging Dog
Sadie
Ranch.
takes charge and protects everyone. While she can come across as naive and rash, sometimes the situation calls for just that mindset. Sadie also plays a major part in the Red Dead Redemption 2 epilogue, serving as the pleasant interruption from Rockstar's version of Farming Simulator.
And to my husband?
After many years have passed, Sadie is now a bounty hunter and reconnects with John.
But you're the only one of these fools that I trust.
As she disrupts the life
I've got
that
to
John
do
had
this.
created with his family. Sadie helps uncover Micah's location and joins John to casually end Micah's life. Once that minor inconvenience has wrapped up, Sadie joins everyone for John's wedding, then disappears without a trace. Probably ended up in South America. Number 3, Micah Bell. Even a snake in the grass needs to be included sometimes. An outlaw all the way through his childhood, Micah was his father's partner in crime while committing various counts of robbery and murder. When Micah finally met Dutch in 1898, Micah saved him from a sour deal and joined the Dutch Vanderlyn gang. After less than a year, Micah pointed the gang in the direction of a ferry boat robbery in Blackwater. The main robbery failure that kicked off the events of Red Dead Redemption 2, it is unclear if Micah had any involvement in that particular failure. Consistent annoyance and rift throughout the entire game. Micah's quick rise to power leads to many fractures among the gang. After the core characters return from being stranded on Guarma, Micah strikes a deal with the Pinkerton Detective Agency and becomes an informant for the federal government. While this seems to leave Dutch confused and yet relatively unfazed, this breaks the remaining gang members apart. The main story can end with a fight between Micah and Arthur, which can end in Arthur's death. Damn you, Micah. Micah remains as the primary antagonist of the Red Dead Redemption 2 epilogue. While Micah has gone into hiding to rebuild his own gang, his whereabouts are discovered from rumors and his former henchmen by Sadie. Against Abigail's wishes, John, Charles, and Sadie raid the mountain camp and have a final duel. Micah is finally put down like the rabid dog he is by John, Sadie, and Dutch. Dutch leaves without saying anything, leaving plenty of gold for those who remain. Number 2, Arthur Morgan. Whew, 5,000 words later, and we finally reach the protagonist of the damn game. While I've already talked about Arthur Morgan plenty, I will provide a quick rundown. Arthur Morgan comes from a broken home of outlaws and absent parents, causing Arthur to move onto the streets at a young age. Arthur is the first member to join the newly formed Dutch Vanderlyn gang, being mentored in the ways of the outlaw by stand-in father figures Dutch Vanderlyn and Hosea Matthews. Arthur quickly becomes one of the best gunslingers in the West and strictly loyal to the success of the gang. As the player takes control of Arthur, we begin to learn that underneath that stubborn, yet surprisingly naive exterior, there's a soldier who longs for a better future where outlaws don't need to exist. As for Arthur's fate, he contracts tuberculosis after strong-arming an infected debtor to death, being coughed on with infected blood in the process. Instead of a quick and painful death, the player is forced to watch as he slowly falls apart and succumbs to his illness alone on the mountaintop. Arthur, you were one of the best, while it lasted. Number 1, Dutch Vanderlyn. El Jefe, the charismatic leader, the wolf among the pack, Dutch Vanderlyn. While not much is known about Dutch's early years, we know that he was not fond of his mother and left home at an early age. After Dutch became friends with Hosea Matthews, they founded the Dutch Vanderlyn gang and began to quickly fill their roster with promising young talent. Dutch's philosophy is all about living independently and without control of your own actions by others, which explains why he has the layer of charisma that makes him convincing to other people. While this is more evident later on in the game, Dutch's philosophy eventually gives him quite the savior complex. While Dutch's story begins as an upcoming skillful ruffian with lofty ideals, Dutch has trouble accepting that his way of life is quickly becoming extinct. You can see Dutch's mind descend into madness as he elevates his levels of manipulation and violence, even feeding a man who wronged him to alligators with his bare hands. Dutch and many of his remaining guns leave the remnants of the Dutch Vanderlyn gang after a standoff with series protagonists Arthur Morgan and John Marston. While Dutch disappears for many years, Dutch returns in both the epilogue of Red Dead Redemption 2 and the primary antagonist in the original game. During the epilogue, it is revealed that Dutch has rejoined or never left Micah as they begin a new gang. However, once confronted by John and Sadie, he has a momentary change of heart and turns on Micah. This change of heart is short-lived as he walks off the snowy mountain into a world of mystery. Towards the end of Red Dead Redemption, Dutch has many encounters with John until finally ending in a standoff of dueling philosophies in the mountains. Dutch later predicts John's betrayal by the government and chooses to commit suicide, falling to his death. Wow, that's everybody. Wow, I feel like I could finally metaphorically put up the towel for a bit. However, I will not stop. This may be the final Red Dead Redemption 2 pick for me, but that doesn't mean you can't check out everything else we've created. If you want more videos just like this, subscribe to the channel, and you can check out more of my videos. Anyway, just remember, game tasty.
Burns in the heat stays in command. Come lay by my side, right here, to where the river turns to dust and God is never rushed. Come lay by my side, right here. Red, I love you and the world. It seemed to make sense when brothers